On this week's episode, we're featuring Margaret Mitchell, Pulitzer Prize winning author of the epic Gone with the Wind. We'll be talking about her life, career, and tragic end, followed by heading to Atlanta, Georgia to show you the house she once lived in, as well as paying a visit to her gravesite. All right here on another exciting episode of History and Relics. Margaret Mitchell, also known by the pen name of Peggy Mitchell, was born in Atlanta, Georgia on November 8, 1900, and was the daughter of a well-known Atlanta lawyer. She spent practically her entire life in Atlanta, growing up on stories of the Old South and the war between the states, as well as taking care of the family house for her father after her mother had died in 1919. Margaret proclaimed herself to be an unscrupulous flirt. Well, perhaps so. She was engaged to 5 men, but maintained that she neither lied nor misled any of them. She was married twice, but her first marriage to Red Kennard Upshaw in 1922 ended within 2 years, and by 1925 she took the hand of John Marsh, a journalist and public relations executive who had been the best man at her first wedding. Neither marriage produced any children. It was said that Margaret actually disliked children. She mysteriously injured her ankle in early 1926, and by May of that year, she left her job at the Atlanta Journal. She spent time writing a society column for the Sunday magazine entitled Elizabeth Bennet's Gossip. She kept her husband John busy too while laid up with that bad ankle. He made frequent trips to the library, lugging books back to their apartment for her to read. One day he said, "For God's sakes, Peggy, can't you write a book instead of reading thousands of them?" Margaret started putting pen to paper. She started working on a novelette and other short stories which never made it to publication. She actually found more joy in writing long letters to folks such as her mother-in-law, Mrs. Marsh. However, there was another epic novel in the mist at this very same time. You know it as Gone with the Wind. Margaret started writing her epic novel in 1926, and by 1928, John, being the good egg that he was, aided her by buying a Remington portable No. 3 typewriter. It took Mitchell 3 years to write Gone with the Wind and spent years more obsessively trying to publish it, until nervously entrusting the massive manuscript to Macmillan Publishers in the fall of 1935, when she met up with Vice President Harold S. Latham, who was making his way through the South on a trip scouting for new authors. It would be her one and only published novel hitting the bookstands on June 30th, 1936. Perhaps she never found time to write another novel, as for years she immersed herself in the details of contracts, bitter arguments with agents and publishers, and anyone who made the slightest unfavorable reference to her book. She indulged in reactionary politics and writing thousands of letters. But, with all that aside, Mitchell became one of the most famous citizens of Atlanta, putting the city on the map. Gone with the Wind quickly became one of the biggest media phenomena of the century. Mitchell had initially hoped to sell 5,000 copies of her book, but on one day alone during that summer, it sold 50,000 copies and 1 million within the first 6 months of publication. Margaret won the National Book Award for Most Distinguished Novel of 1936 and the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1937. Within 2 years, the book was translated and printed in 16 foreign languages. As the sales of the book kept climbing, that caught the eye of Hollywood, which led to David O. Selznick agreeing to pay her $50,000 for the movie rights. Selznick went on, though, to spend millions more in making the motion picture, which premiered in Atlanta in 1939 at Loew's Grand Theater, which was decorated with tall white columns to take on the appearance of Scarlett's home, Tara, in the movie. The governor of Georgia proclaimed a state holiday. Buildings were draped in Confederate bunting. The city went wild and parties went on for days, while producer David O. Selznick and some of the film's stars, such as Clark Gable and Vivian Leigh, were feted with huge crowds and bands. People almost literally fought for tickets to the giant costume ball held the night before the opening, which Margaret Mitchell did not attend. Turns out she didn't like the film, but she did go to the premiere itself, as did 3 Confederate Civil War veterans who had actually fought in the Battle of Atlanta in 1864, the youngest of which was 91 years old at the time. In early 1949, it was announced that 8 million copies of the book had sold thus far in 30 languages and in 40 countries. An estimated 50,000 copies of the book were being sold yearly in the United States. Re-releases of the movie were voted 4 times in 1947 as being the most popular movie shown throughout the country. However, on the hot summer evening of August 11, 1949, at about 8:15 p.m., just a few blocks from their Atlanta apartment at 979 Crescent Avenue, commonly referred to by Margaret as the Dump, Margaret and John parked their car on the side of Peachtree Street. On their way to see the film Canterbury Tales at the Peachtree Arts Theater, they started crossing the intersection of Peachtree and 13th Street. They were halfway across the street when a speeding car on the wrong side of the road was suddenly upon them. The driver was an off-duty taxi cab driver who was driving his private car home after having a bit too much to drink at a local bar. Margaret attempted to dodge the oncoming car by jumping back towards the curb that she and her husband had left. The driver desperately attempted to steer his car in the opposite direction, trying to avoid the couple, but it wasn't enough. Margaret was hit and dragged along the underside of the car and left unconscious. She was rushed to Grady Hospital. X-rays later revealed that Mitchell's skull had been fractured from the top of her head to the top of her spine. She also suffered a fractured pelvis in 2 places. Margaret Mitchell succumbed to her injuries and died on August 16, 1949, at the age of 48. Governor Herman Talmadge ordered the flag over the state capitol lowered to half-staff until after the funeral. Margaret was buried at Oakland Cemetery in downtown Atlanta. John later joined her in death in 1952 at the age of 56. In 1978, Mitchell was inducted into the Georgia Newspaper Hall of Fame, followed by the Georgia Women of Achievement in 1994 and the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame in 2000. The driver, Hugh Dorsey Gravett, age 29, was immediately arrested at the scene and charged. Police Chief Burt Jenkins pushed for an immediate murder indictment, but Gravett was later out on bond after posting $5,450. However, after Margaret's death, he voluntarily surrendered to police. Gravett was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter and served about 10 months of an 18-month sentence in prison. Gravett died in 1994 at the age of 74. Gone with the Wind has been described as perhaps the most compulsively readable novel ever written. In 1998, the book was deemed the best-selling book of all time after the Bible, with a total of 23 million copies sold worldwide. And it was estimated in 1996 that more than 200 million people had seen the iconic movie. That's 24 and 26 years ago now, folks. Imagine those numbers now. What is now known as the Margaret Mitchell House was originally constructed as a single-family residence in 1899. It later became known as the Crescent Apartments. Neglected during the Depression and World War II, the building was at least partially renovated in the late 1940s. Its condition continued to deteriorate, and by 1950, apartment number 1 was the only occupied unit. In 1964, the building was thoroughly renovated, at which time many of the historic architectural features of the building were either removed or covered up. The property then went vacant after 1978. In September of 1994, as part of the Piedmont Arts Festival, the decaying building was used as a prop for an art installation which consisted of hundreds of inflated surgical gloves covering the roof of the building. On the festival's opening night, a fire was set in the southeast corner of the second floor. In spite of a near-complete destruction of the house, plans for restoration became plans for reconstruction, which began in 1995. That work was nearly complete when, unbelievably, the house was torched again in May 1996, destroying most of the house for a second time. But once again, apartment number 1 largely escaped damage. The house was heavily insured, and a second reconstruction began almost immediately. Today, the home is fully restored back to its former glory for everyone to see, learn, and remember. Now, we weren't able to go inside the home as it's temporarily closed, but we did enjoy our time here strolling around the perimeter. Perhaps next time, too, we'll be able to visit the Atlanta History Center, as they have Margaret's original desk that once graced the parlor of this home, while only a replica is kept here now. Also on display at the Atlanta History Center are the last pages from a few chapters within the book, which Margaret actually wrote first. The rest of the manuscript was burned after Mitchell's death. And now, before we leave out, let's visit Margaret's gravesite at Oakland Cemetery, one of the most beautiful and picturesque cemeteries we've ever been to. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed our program. If you like our content, we ask that you give us a thumbs up, a like, share with your friends, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell so you always know when our new content is published. And all of this costs nothing, but means a lot to us and keeps us growing. You may also leave us a tip if you choose. The address is provided here on your screen, and a link is provided in the description area below. So until next time, everyone, this one is history. Hey, and be sure to check out our eBay store under ID History and Relics. We're now featuring channel merchandise, starting with our new logo magnet. They're only $5.50, and net proceeds go towards supporting our channel.